Let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, we come before you this morning, inviting your Spirit into our lives, into our hearts, and into our minds. We ask, Lord, that as we again look at the foundation of this movement of Adventism, that we can understand these things clearly. We ask that you can continue to guide us in digging up this history and finding these precious jewels. Help us to understand the truth as it is in Jesus. We pray this in his name. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. Now, we're going to finish off William Miller's Dream as Jeff had published it. We're also going to look at some other statements. So I've found a number of different studies in some of these newsletters that we're going to look at. One we're going to look at in August 2003. So they're understanding after September 11th. But we're going to finish off this study dealing with Miller's Dream. And that was from 1999. And it's going to be October. So this is William Miller's Dream as Jeff published it. Now, it was noted yesterday by Dwight that when you go on to the Ellen G. White site, or even on the E.G. White disc, they have this article, and the footnotes you have to click on, but they leave out 3 of the footnotes. Now they number them, so you can tell that they actually are leaving them out. They leave out number 6, number 11, and number 13. They just don't include those footnotes. And so we are going to look at those. Well, specifically what they are. They are included in this publication. So Jeff, when he published it with all the footnotes. But it's interesting that, and actually what Jeff has published here is the footnotes themselves. So this is all of the footnotes. Now he doesn't number them as the numbered footnotes, which I wish he had. It would have been a little bit easier to understand, clearer to understand. Now, and he doesn't publish the dream in the way that we see it. So we have, let me see here. Yeah, he just has the footnotes from here, which I find odd. So no dream, just the footnotes. Now the dream we found is in early writings, so it's added to early writings, William Miller's Dream. And Ellen White refers to it when she talks about the man with the dirt brush coming in. And so this is being then interpreted by James White. And we had, and the way that I found this actually originally is I was searching for the first statements that we find in Jeff's newsletters regarding the Midnight Cry. And this is actually the first time that my search finds a statement regarding the Midnight Cry, but it's just in James White's footnote to William Miller's Dream, or his interpretation of Miller's Dream. Now, we had read through some of these. We didn't get all the way, and we had started dealing with Samuel Snow. So we're going to come back to some of these things, but I want to get through these footnotes and then look specifically at the footnotes that they left out on the E.G. White estate, what that might mean, and then look at some other things. So in dressing Samuel Snow, one of the points that we were addressing had to do with the falling away of snow. Now, what does snow represent? Who is he typifying in our time?
Well, Snow always thought that he was Elijah the prophet.
Yeah. So, but but he's wrong about that.
Right.
So who is he typifying in this movement or in our time? Because we say that snow typifies this movement. At least that's what I've taught for a long time, is that, and this movement does give a message at midnight in the midnight cry. So that's still future, or it's after July 18th, we can put it that way. So after July 18th, after Samuel Snow's last letter, 3 days before midnight, he then gives the midnight cry in Boston, and then it's empowered at Exeter. So is there a parallel to Samuel Snow in his position that he's Elijah the prophet? Are we to look for some aspect of this movement to follow in the way of Snow personally, in his errors and in the directions that he goes?
Do we want to follow his errors?
No, we don't. But that's the point. If we can understand what Snow's errors are, then we could avoid them. Which, I mean, I think they're in a sense simple errors to avoid. At least they should be. Because what is Snow's error? Just on a basic explanation of it.
More lifting himself up than lifting up the word of God.
Okay. And why did he lift himself up?
Because he wanted the attention.
Okay. But he got the attention to some degree because he wasn't a major preacher. He was doing working independently on his own. He's going to give this message that he sees before other people see it, and other people then eventually take it up. So he makes a prediction, right? This prediction is that Jesus is coming back in the fall, not in the spring. But the mistake that he makes is because God led him, he now thinks that God has continued to lead him, that somehow he has to be the prophet.
Okay.
But it's not him that's going to be the prophet. Okay.
Right. He wants to be, instead of the forerunner, he wants to be the actual.
Well, I mean, Elijah the prophet comes before Christ. So John the Baptist is Elijah in the coming of Christ the first time. So Snow believes that he's the Elijah prior to the second coming of Christ. Now, who do we say Elijah the prophet is typifying in Millerite history? Because in Christ's day, it's John the Baptist, right? So that's the fulfillment there. Elisha then represents Christ. We got John the Baptist. Millerite history. Who do we have?
Well, in this type of a situation, wouldn't it be better to place Miller as Elijah the prophet rather than letting Snow have that position?
Okay. Yeah, I would say so. Now, one of the things that we did in this movement is we put Jeff as a parallel to Miller.
Exactly.
And what Parminder and Tess did is they took these previous examples, Moses and Joshua, Elijah and Elisha, John the Baptist and Christ, Miller, and who would they put with Miller? Did they put Ellen White? Did they put James White? I know some people put James White. But then they're going to put Jeff and then Parminder, right? And Jeff even gets caught up in this to some degree when he passes over the cloak to Parminder back in 2019, between March 27th and April 8th, right? So but what's the problem with that? Because I mean, even in this whole thing, when we say that Jeff is parallel to Miller, who parallels Snow? Did we have a person? I know they try to make Tess to be Samuel Snow. Lots of people were trying to be Snow. Chawatu was trying to be Snow.
Don Frost tried to be Snow.
Yeah, Don Frost, because his name's Frost and there's Snow and Frost and all those things. Yeah. And of course, he makes fun of the idea that Jeff was even a prophet. I mean, he says that's the thing that he knows about Jeff, but yet Don Frost himself makes himself out to be a prophet, at least intimates that as much as anything Jeff did. But Jeff's looking at it on a line just as a symbol. Jeff isn't, in his understanding of his role, he also understood that he was Snow. That is, this movement was Snow. That we weren't looking for a person, except that he got caught up for a time with what Parminder and Tess were doing. So he was persuaded to some degree that Tess was Snow. But that was wrong, right? So he was deceived just as other people were. But the question about Snow would have to be this movement. That is, Jeff initially has this work that he is doing, that he was called to do, that he was raised up to do. And then you're going to have the movement take over that role. When does the movement do that? When does Snow take up his role? When does he take over from Miller?
Early 1844.
Okay, so let's take a look at this. So you have August 11th, 1840. Well, I need to stop sharing, so. Okay, so we got August 11th, 1840. We have April 19th, 1844. We're gonna have, of course, midnight cry, and October 22. So when did Snow come into the picture?
Just about the August 19th of 1844,
Okay, so
or April, sorry.
April 19th. So we know that he's going to be writing these letters from February 16th to July 18th. And there's 3 days here. So you got July 21st and August 15th. So this period here of 153 days comes after 9/11 and before 9/11. Right, so we've talked about this before. Now,
Right.
so trying to understand if this is this movement, right? So this is FFA. We have over here, we'll just say we got Miller. Miller's, in a sense, he's continuing all the way to here because that's where his prophecy ends. Now, if we're going to put Jeff here, Jeff ends where?
More at midnight, isn't it?
Well, because we have to understand Jeff's role as something that Miller typified.
Okay.
So Miller typified the role of Jeff as an individual. That is, Jeff comes and follows in the example of Miller. But there comes a point in which Miller has this transition occur. Now, Miller, after here, has no role whatsoever, other than the fact that he had been a part of the movement. But he's not involved in any of these predictions dealing with October 22nd. It's not really until October that he even really accepts it. Now, we know that Miller made some predictions regarding the 7th month, and that was the thing that was picked up by Snow. In 1843, Miller said that it was possible that Christ could return in the fall of 1843. When that time passed, Samuel Snow recognized that Miller was right about the fall, but that he was wrong about the year. And so Snow set about to figure out how to figure out that the next year, 1844, would be the end of the 2300 years or days. So that's what Snow was attempting to do. Now, we could also look at December 31st. So I'm going to put it in here. So you got December 31st, 1843. Now, Miller's original prediction went all the way to December 31st, 1843, correct? That at one point, he said that Christ is going to come sometime in the year 1843, which would go from January 1st to December 31st. But near the end of 1842, he came to understand that the Jewish year 1843 ended in the spring of 1844. So then he was going from spring to spring of 1843 to spring of 1844, just before 1843 began. And this is the first time he does that. He talks about March 21st as the date. So we could even argue that Miller goes all the way to 1843. Now, this is where Snow gives his testimony at Boston. So in the Boston Tabernacle on December 31st, on New Year's Eve. And the next day is when he decides that he's going to proclaim that Christ is coming back in the fall of 1844, not in the spring. So can we look at this as a transition between Miller and snow? It's a gradual transition, but it does occur here, correct? To some degree.
To some degree.
Right. So there's this transition. You have these two 9/11s. This was an issue that Jeff and I were trying to sort out back in 2018. Because we were both teaching Samuel Snow's letters. And the problem that we had, though, was 9/11, because 9/11 parallels August 11th, 1840. But Samuel Snow, he's going to come after August 11th, 1840. But 9/11 also parallels April 19th, and Samuel Snow comes before April 19th. So how do we reconcile these two 9/11s? As you know, we brought them together, I think in 2015, so that now April 19th also was typified by 9/11, not just August 11th, 1844. 9/11 was typified by these two dates, so did it the other way around. Right, so this is typifying 9/11, and this is typifying 9/11, but it depends on which perspective you're in. So when it comes to FFA, does it begin before 9/11 or after 9/11?
Okay, your question is, does FFA begin before or after 9/11?
Yeah,
I mean, the logic would say that it truly begins its ministry after 9/11.
right, in some ways, even though FFA exists before 9/11, it depends on which 9/11 you're speaking of. Does that make sense? That is, we have two 9/11s in Millerite history, because 9/11 typifies both these events, or both these events typify 9/11. So if we're going to look at FFA as snow, how would we understand that in our history? How are we going to understand the role of FFA? I mean, Jeff is FFA before 9/11, if it's this 9/11, right? Because FFA exists before this 9/11, but FFA also exists after this 9/11. And Snow, Jeff admitted to me that he's now part of this group. He no longer had the role of Miller once we got to a certain point in our history. That is, that the message was taken over by the movement itself. That is, Snow took over the message. That Jeff's original understanding became the foundation for what later was developed that Jeff had no control over. That is, Jeff was no longer, even though he was our leader, just like Miller was in this history, but he no longer had control of what was happening. God had taken the movement into his own hands. This is what Jeff recognized. Now, he got off track a little bit with Parminder and Tess, but his initial understanding was this back in 2018, before Tess and Parminder deceived him. So the question goes, if we can understand Snow correctly, we can understand what error we need to avoid. Because Snow is going to be here and here. But would we agree that FFA is Snow here? That FFA ended on July 18th, 2020.
Right.
Okay.
So the application is being made that since FFA ended July 18th, 2020, that's paralleling Snow, with his final letter on July 18th, 2020.
Yeah, specifically, we're typified by Snow's letters. That is, we made this prediction before midnight, all based upon Samuel Snow's letters. And that prediction of July 18th ended up typifying this disappointment, but it's typifying this disappointment. Snow's letters are. And this is a symbol of 187. This is the 187th day from here. So his letters typify this because it's predicting this. And yet that was a failed prediction. So I'm saying that Samuel Snow's letters represent this movement up to July 18th. Now, after July 18th, do we have Snow manifesting the idea that he's Elijah the prophet?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, I'd say yes.
Okay. And that would be, explain the yes then.
So we're looking to parallel FFA and Snow's letters. So we're trying to address which of the 9/11s Snow is actually part of, right?
Yeah. Snow's letters
Correct.
are part of.
But Snow's letters are provided by Snow.
Right. But they come after this 9/11 and before this 9/11.
Right.
Now, April 19th, see, part of the problem is we have these different lines within our lines. And we know that there's the line of the priests. Now, the other thing about April 19th has two Passovers on either side of it. There's this Passover, which is based upon the chronology that the Millerites understood, that if March 21st was the first day of the first month, April 3rd is Passover, right?
Okay.
April 19th marks this division, the first disappointment, and then we'll call this November 9th, 2019. Is that our first disappointment?
We could place it as such.
Okay, and then we're going to have May 2nd. This is also Passover. So this group of people that end up on this side of November 9th rejecting light, and then there's this other group that accepts light, and this light is going to be the light that May 2nd is the Passover. That is, they accept that this is the first day of the first month. But this group doesn't accept that, right? So the Protestants, they're not going to be accepting that October 22nd is the 10th day of the seventh month. They're going to have September 23rd as the 10th day of the seventh month, correct?
Okay. I wouldn't disagree.
So this is a separation between the foolish and the false priests, correct?
Okay. So with the two Passovers, one is the initial ordained, the other is for those that were on a trip and unable to celebrate it, or those that touched a dead body, or those that.
Well, no, it's not. Well, okay. So you're saying there's two, like the second Passover.
Right.
This isn't really the second Passover.
Okay.
It's the true or the false Passover, right? Because this Passover is not the Passover. That's the Passover that the Jews kept in 1844. both the Karaite and the Rabbinic Jews.
Okay,
March 21st was the first day of the first month for the Rabbinic and Karaite Jews in 1844. The Millerites mistakenly believed they were using the Karaite calendar, but the Karaites rarely have, I mean, they would never have a Passover this late. It would be way too late if you're doing the barley harvest as your basis for the Passover. So this Passover was based upon a misunderstanding, but it is the correct one according to the biblical calendar. Even though they came through a wrong method, the Millerites got the correct Passover. That is, they got April 19th as the first day of the first month. So this group here would typify Parminder's group. And then this is the group that carries on with the prediction, right? This marks the dividing between the true and the false. So this is the false. Do it like that, false. And this is the true. And the true continue on past November 9th. Parminder and Tess, their whole group, they're lost in symbols, right? Symbolically in this history. Doesn't mean that somebody who'd follow that group is truly lost, they could be saved. But this is a shut door for the Protestants. And in our history, when we're looking at this is within our movement itself. That is, we're taking 9/11, which is April 19th, and we're using it as something internal.
okay, so can we say that this is also a parallel to those of the children of Israel that chose to return from Babylon and those that chose to remain in Babylon?
In which, under which history?
What I'm talking about here, since we have a shut door, April 19th, showing in the middle of this example,
Yeah,
can we, in this type of a history, can we make the same application that those that chose to return from Babylon at the true are those that are symbolized here, and those that chose to remain in Babylon are those of the false?
well, that could be the case. I'm not going to look at that history right now, but it's probably not wrong. It's just that we need to understand this history.
But there aren't they parallel for in all of these situations? That's what the question I'm asking.
Yeah, they are. I'm just not going to look at that because there's a lot of other details there that would just complicate the picture. But you are correct. So, but in this history here, Millerite history, which is the primary history we look at to understand our history, we know that this event, Midnight and the Midnight Cry, occurred after July 18th. And yet we made a parallel where we took November 9th and July 18th as being Midnight and the Midnight Cry. So could we put this April 19th here as November 9th and July 18th as July 18th?
Well, I would say that that's very possible, because here again, November 9th would be another type of a 9/11.
Yeah.
So the application would be correct.
Okay. Now, this also allows us, though, with these two 9/11s, to see how FFA, it began, after 9/11, this 9/11, but it also began before this 9/11, right? That is, there's two 9/11s. And so the problem that Jeff was having, that I was having, and he would say, well, FFA started before 9/11. Well, I would say, well, it started after 9/11. And yet we have this 9/11 as typifying this separation that was happening. Now, this separation happens over a period of time. It's not just Parminder and Tess. It's really all the separations that are happening from 2014 onward. But
Okay,
July 18th ends that period of time. And now we have this 3 days. Yeah.
okay, so the first 9/11 that you're referring to, is that a literal 9/11/1814 that you're talking about?
No, this is August 11th, 1840,
Okay,
right? So we parallel this with 9/11, but we
okay,
also paralleled April 19th with 9/11. Of course, 9/11 in our history appears to be one event, but I'm saying that we can actually separate 9/11 in our history. So
symbolically,
we can look at FFA as starting before 9/11. but we
right,
can also look at FFA as starting after 9/11.
okay,
And so it can fit into this history because both of these represent 9/11. And this 9/11 then can also represent November 9th, because we would say that, well, April 19th is 9/11, right? But we can say that 9/11 also represents this division, what we would call the first disappointment. And then we have July 18th, that would parallel the Great Disappointment within FFA itself. So we can't do this on the big line. See, that's part of the problem that we had, is that we took these two and brought them together, but we were doing that because we were actually only looking at our line.
okay, so instead of big line, we're talking one of the alternate lines. And that's not even a good way of saying it. It's a parallel line.
Okay, this is the Sunday law, right?
Correct.
And we know that our whole line is really just the Sunday law. Right, that's what we come to understand, is that the Sunday law that Jeff is looking for, that's all he's looking for, is the Sunday law. And yet, as he starts approaching the Sunday law, all of this detail starts to come out because he's zooming in closer to the Sunday law. And we say 9/11, the angel of Revelation 18 came down. Well, Ellen White marks that at the Sunday law, but that means we have to recognize that 9/11 is the Sunday law, that it is the beginning of the Sunday law. That's where we become guilty until proved innocent. It's just that this becomes a progressive line. And this whole line from 1989 to the Sunday law is just a repeat of Millerite history. That Ellen White doesn't have any of this on her line. She just has the Sunday law after October 22nd, 1844. But we line up the Sunday law with October 22nd, 1844. That's because October 22nd, 1844 is the last waymark before the Sunday law for Ellen White. So the Sunday law, in this repeat of history, this repeat of the parable of the 10 virgins, becomes just part of the Sunday law, because you have to have the first and second before you can have the third. And the Sunday law is the empowerment of the third angel's message. So this history here, in understanding Samuel Snow already in this history believes that he's a prophet. He believes that he's Elijah the prophet. He doesn't tell people that, but he hints at it. And we can know that he believed it because after October 22nd, 1844, that's what he begins to promote. And Snow still accepts his original prediction and all the reasons behind it. He doesn't give up on his belief of the 10th day of the 7th month was fulfilled on October 22nd. So he's like the Adventists who accept the Sabbath and the sanctuary, in that he still holds to the 7th month movement. He doesn't reject it. Yet, he is a false prophet. And we don't want to make the same mistake as Samuel Snow. Now, we can single out Parminder's group and all these different groups that left, and we could even mark the group that rejected July 18th on December 6th. They're going to do that in 2020. They give this declaration that basically rejects the whole foundation of this movement. But this movement is carrying on in different ways. So just like after October 22nd, you have all these different groups. And so this history here is also typifying this history. So we can even look at the history after October 22nd as representing what's happening within this movement, the different factions that exist. And the thing is, we don't want to be parts of factions. We want to be the ones who accept this history, who understand it correctly. We want to be on the right side of the issue. And of course, there's lots tied to it. We can look at Snow, and the problem with Snow, of course, is the idea that he's exalting himself. But we see other people doing the same thing in other ways. The only group that's going to understand this history is James and Ellen White's little flock. They're going to understand what's happening. And do we have to expect the same thing in our history? That there is just a few who understand the truth, and that the vast majority go off into various kinds of errors? We would have to take that position. Now, it's a difficult one, because what makes it that we're not just doing what Samuel Snow did? Now, of course, Samuel Snow is going to stand at midnight in the midnight cry, but that's a different line. Remember, this here is prefiguring this line. This is going to be whoever can come out on this side of the issue, on the right side of the issue. It's going to be their testimony at Boston and Exeter that is going to empower the movement to prepare Adventists for the Sunday law. And so whatever our message is, it has to be the correct message if we're going to give a message to the Levites. And I made a suggestion yesterday that it's the message itself, not necessarily the people. I didn't say it that way. But can we see it's about the message, not about the people?
Isn't that kind of a foregone conclusion?
Yeah.
Yes.
But people want to make it about the people. Now, some people want to make it a message, but the message, if the message rejects this, it can't be the message. We need to understand this history correctly. And I don't think there are as many in this movement that do. I'm not sure that we fully understand it. But there's definitely people who have a wrong understanding of this history. And the only reason they have a wrong understanding is they're not examining it close enough, because they are called upon to do so, and yet they're not. They're just looking at what's happening around them today with the pandemic. And I'm not trying to condemn any people. I'm just saying we can't get caught up on what's happening around us. We have to go back, because if we're going to understand what's happening around us, what's happening now, what's going to happen in the future, we need to understand the past, because the key to the past, or to the present and the future, is the past. So this movement can't do like Snow. It can't become arrogant. I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about the movement itself. It can't just believe because God was leading it, that God is still leading it. We have to recognize God was leading us, but we can't take just the fact that God led us in the past. That means everything we do is being led of God. We have to be careful about it. And remember, this isn't about individuals. This is about this movement. Really, no individuals stand out. The movement is Snow, Snow in its letters. And the message that it gives, the message of Samuel Snow's letters, is the message that's going to be given to the Levites at midnight in the midnight cry. But it might be a completely different group of people from us. It doesn't have to be us particularly. Maybe some of us might be part of that. But I believe that God's going to raise up better people than us to do this, that he's already raised them up, that they're already studying and understanding this message. And we can't just imagine that, us as individuals, because God gave us particular light, that somehow we're ordained to be the ones that are going to give this message. We have a responsibility to prepare a message. And also we need to be prepared individually, because if we're not, we will be lost. So all of these dangers that existed after October 22nd, 1844 also exist for us. And we have to be really aware of those things. Now, remember, we read about some of these errors, and there was lots of them, that the 1,000 years were in the past, that the 144,000 were those that came out of the graves after Christ's resurrection, the no work doctrine, the doctrine of the destruction of infants, and I'm not sure what that is. I haven't been able to find anything on it. But James White says these errors were so industriously propagated and urged upon the waiting flock at the time Brother Miller had the dream, the true jewels were excluded from sight, and the words of the prophet were applicable, and judgment is turned away backward, and justice standeth afar off. Now remember, James White takes the jewels as referring to people, and I don't think that's necessarily wrong in the context of his time. But in the context of our time, these jewels have to be truth. They can't be individuals. That's not what is being addressed in Miller's dream when we make an application to our time. Can we see that the individuals in Miller's day being jewels is analogous with the truths in our day being jewels, that they're not contradictory?
Repeat your question, please.
So Miller is taking the jewels to represent people, but that only applies to his time.
Okay, now Miller is taking the jewels to represent people, but these footnotes are written by
James White.
Correct.
Yeah, so James White is, but I would think that James White and Miller, because I think that the way that Miller presents it, James White is taking that implication from Miller.
Well,
but that's why Miller felt relieved. I mean, that's the way that I'm taking it, is that James White is reading into Miller's mind. But maybe he's misreading it as well. I don't know. But
okay, but what if both applications are correct?
well, that's what I'm saying, is I'm saying that in the application in their day, it's referring to the people, but in our day, it's referring to the truths.
Well, I'm asking the question whether or not Miller saw this as
the truths.
As the truths.
Well, I mean, it's possible, but I still think James White is correct in how he's perceiving Miller's understanding, because when he's talking about Miller sitting down and weeping, and then Miller's attitude about the dream, I think James White is reading into that Miller is concerned about the people, not so much the truths.
Well, I mean, see, this goes back to the first footnote.
Okay.
Because, we were starting here on the 8th footnote.
Right.
But the first footnote, as
The
White
casket
was going through this,
represents the Bible, right?
correct.
Okay.
So this is part of the reason why I'm asking the question as to whether or not Miller was seeing this as the truths of the Bible, because that seems to be the point that James White is making.
Well,
With
James
your
White is saying,
footnote.
yeah, so James White is saying the casket is the great truths. The key is the interpretation. And that casket is open, but the jewels and the diamonds of all sorts and sizes are the children of God. So that's James White's interpretation.
Right, because what you have in front of you right now is footnote number 1, footnote number 2, and then going into footnote number 3.
Exactly.
So when Miller is going through the dream,
Mhm.
stating that he found the casket to be filled with all sorts and sizes of jewels, diamonds, precious stone, gold and silver coin of every dimension and value, beautifully arranged in their several places in the casket. The reference prior to that has been more that the casket was that of the Bible. Now, if we as people are accepting truths of the Bible, we become as jewels. I agree with that.
Mhm.
But in this type of a situation,
Mhm.
you have to accept something before you can become as jewels. And to accept this means that you're accepting the truths that you're finding.
Right. So we would agree with that.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that the primary application in that time is about the people. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that it doesn't apply to truths at all, because we do see that truths are gathered up. But in this application where we take Miller's dream and we apply it to our time, I think the primary application then is to the truths, because it's in this history that the seven thunders are unsealed, that Millerite history is understood,
Okay.
and that all of the truths of scriptures come together. That doesn't really happen after 1844. Certain truths are brought and put into place, the sanctuary, the Sabbath, the state of the dead, etc. But mostly we see a rejection of Miller's understanding beginning with the 2520 and progressing. So
Right.
if we're going to look at the fulfillment of this, it has to be in our history.
Okay. Now, as Brother White was noting,
Yeah.
in the 4th footnote, the people began to come in, at first few in number, but increased to a crowd. When the Advent doctrine was first preached by Brother Miller and a very few others, it had but little effect, but very few were wakened up by it. But from 1840 to 1844, wherever it was preached, the whole community was aroused.
Yeah.
So this gives us the point where that are looking at the jewels are increasing to a crowd.
Mhm.
And then the fifth footnote gives reference back to the three angels' message.
Yeah.
And that's the one when the flying angel, which is at top of the second column,
Mhm.
when the flying angel first began to preach the everlasting good news, fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, many shouted for joy in view of the coming of Jesus. Now, as he recognized this, as White recognized this bring them to the autumn of 1844, when a scattering time commenced.
Mhm.
Now, going back to what you were putting on the board, would White's application of the autumn of 1844, of the scattering time commencing at that point, be a parallel to what you were just placing on the board?
Well, it would be a parallel to the time between July 18th and July 21st. That is, those 3 days symbolize the period of time after 1844.
Okay. So the period between July 18th and July 21st, you are saying would be parallel to the autumn of 1844, but not reaching to October 22nd.
No, because his letters represent up to July 18th, go to October 22nd, because it's prefiguring, because his prediction is prefiguring the event that he's predicting. And then that 3 days, that 3-day period is before midnight. Now, midnight represents what then? If the disappointment is July 18th, what does midnight represent?
I'm not sure I'm understanding what you're asking.
Does midnight represent the Sunday law?
I think it prefigures the Sunday law.
Yeah, that's what yeah, exactly. So it prefigures it. So in Samuel Snow's letters between July 18th and midnight, we have this prefiguring of something on a bigger line. Now that line is just going to be the line of the Millerites up to the disappointment and afterwards. So we're going to take that history that we have just gone through is analogous with Samuel Snow's letters, and we're in the period of the 3 days. Now, that 3 days, that period of time, however we want to understand it, is a time in which we're looking at midnight as being on the big line, or not the big line, the line of the Levites. But midnight on the line of the Levites typifies the Sunday law on the big line, because it's followed by the midnight cry, which typifies the loud cry. And October 22nd, 1844 typifies the close of probation for the world. So we have to sort out these lines, and the way that we do it is by understanding the lines in Millerite history, not the way that Parminder tried to do it, where he had these staggered lines and he arbitrarily gave this priest, Levites, Nethinim, and the world lines, these 4 different lines that we don't find in Millerite history. So in order to understand our lines, we have to know what lines in Millerite history we're repeating and where we are in Millerite history.
Okay, so to continue.
Yeah.
As part of the 5th footnote, James White writes, mark this, it was those who once shouted for joy that troubled and scattered the jewels. And none have so effectually scattered the flock and led them astray since 1844 as those who once preached the truth and rejoiced in it, but have since denied the work of God and the fulfillment of prophecy in our past Advent experience. Would we be making the point that those that once shouted for joy encompass Parminder and Tess, but also would be part of the situation prior for those that gave the December 6th pronouncement?
Right. And anybody else who even at once rejoiced in this message, but then turns from it. So we have all these groups. That's what I'm trying to say, is there was many people who rejoiced in this message and yet have rejected it.
So in other words, those that deny the work of God in leading, as he did with Jonah, as he has with this movement, are those that are scattering and troubling the jewels.
Yeah, and the jewels can represent both the individuals and the truths.
No disagreement on that point.
Right. Though James White is making the application primarily that the jewels are the flock, the children of God. But you can see that they're absolutely tied together, because the whole way in which they're troubled is by these false doctrines.
Well, they have to be tied together.
Yeah,
They're, in what manner could they be separated?
right. Yeah. So what I'm saying, though, in our history, the primary, that doesn't mean that we don't have jewels representing people either. That they do, right? But the primary point of our history is the gathering up of these jewels. Because even though those jewels were scattered in Millerite history, if we're going to look at them as truths, they weren't completely gathered up. That is, we don't have the casket shining 10 times brighter than the sun.
Well, we haven't gotten that far yet.
Right. But in our history, we do. Our history has been the unsealing of the seven thunders, the understanding of Millerite history and Adventist history and the whole Bible. And so the truths that what William Miller's dream is primarily pointing to, this is my point, is to our history. That's what I'm trying to say. So even though James White is applying it to his history, it's clear that it applies more to our history than it does to his history. And that the way that he applies it is different in some details than we would apply it to in our history. That is, he's going to focus upon the jewels as being people. And I'm saying that we have to focus upon the jewels as being the truths, even though both are tied together. Does that make sense?
It's got a good point.
Okay.
Now, going to the sixth footnote, that's one of the, it's one of those that was not included on the Ellen White website. It starts Brother Miller's testimony. Brother Miller's testimony for a number of months after the midnight cry at the seventh month, 1844, was that the door was shut and that the Advent movement was a fulfillment of prophecy, and that we had been right in preaching time. Now, here again, there are many right now that are very direct that we should take Mrs. White's word that time shall be no longer a factor in prophecy. And they're holding to that. But yet here's James White saying that they were right in preaching time, even though Christ himself said, no man knoweth the day or the hour, right?
Yeah.
He, Miller, exhorted his brethren through the Advent Herald to hold fast, to be patient, and not to grudge against one another, and God would soon justify them for preaching time. Is this not where we are today regarding December 25th?
Yeah, and July 18th. Yeah.
Okay. In this way, he pled for the jewels while he felt his accountability for them and that it would be immense. So in this situation, we can draw closer to the example of Jeff typifying Miller, and that this remnant movement is in another way also taking lessons from Miller, right?
Yeah. Now, what we're doing is we're studying Jeff, because Jeff isn't here personally. He chose to step aside because he didn't want to make some of the same mistakes that Miller made. He didn't want to repeat that part of Miller's history. And which because he sympathized with those that rejected the sanctuary truth. So that was Jeff's intent of stepping aside. He didn't, that his judgment couldn't be trusted.
But in this situation, has he not, in a manner of speaking, still typified Miller because he stepped aside regarding the July 18th and December 25th understandings?
Yeah, but my point is that Jeff, right now we're studying him. He's testifying to the truth right now by just reading him.
Okay,
By putting what Jeff has done, Jeff is still standing as a witness after July 18th.
okay.
So
But
I
in
understand what
this,
you're saying, but yeah, we're just kind of trying, for people listening, it sounds like we're arguing almost, but we're really just trying to sort this out.
if I was arguing, you would know it.
Oh, yeah, I know that. Okay, but anyway,
Okay.
somebody listening might see, because we sound like we're at odds with each other.
No.
We're just sorting through this, right?
Okay, so the point being that James White is giving testimony that they were right to preach time, even though they understood biblically that they were not to preach the event that they did.
Right.
In this situation, we were correct in recognizing that an event was was soon to occur,
Mhm.
and that this needed to go before the world.
Mhm.
If it didn't go before the world, they would not be able to recognize how correct the event predicted was when it does occur.
Right. So this is the thing, and you're bringing up this very good point, in that, first off, after July 18th, there was this attack upon us because we had a failed prediction. But it was pretty clear that the Millerites had a failed prediction. A few of them, quite a
Well,
few, right?
Okay,
And
but
you could argue, the question that I asked, were the enemies of the Millerites correct because they said nothing happened, your predictions failed, and they had biblical arguments, no man knoweth the day or the hour, to use against the Millerites. And so wouldn't you argue that the enemies of the Millerites were correct? Well, the typical Adventist understanding is, well, Christ moved to the most holy place, but that's not something that's seen, right? That could just be the delusion of the Millerites as far as the Protestants are concerned. They don't see anything. So that argument against us was an argument against Miller, right?
Okay, agreed. Now, but my question in putting this before the world,
Yeah.
wouldn't this be when this event occurs, won't this be in a manner of speaking, a double affirmation that, number one, the movement was correct to bring the Nashville prophecy before the world, but larger, that Ellen White was correct and is and was truly a prophet of God?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're all aware of the different Adventists, the different books written that deride Ellen White as being a prophet.
Yeah.
And there are many that look at this that, well, because many within the church view it this way, that they're nothing more than a cult.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we would be grouped in that as a cult, for all the things that we've done.
Okay.
Right. But the reality is, if you deride the Millerites, and this is something I learned really early on as an Adventist reading Kingdom of the Cults by Walter Martin, that you're actually deriding Christians because you can say the same thing about the resurrection of Christ.
Okay.
So once you've seen people in this movement attacking July 18th in the manner that they did, that is, using the same arguments that were used against the Millerites, using the same arguments that were used against the Christians, they basically shot themselves in the foot. They had nothing to stand on. to mix two metaphors and make them work. So we can see that if we are going to continue on understanding the truth, we have to accept the truths of the past. To be in this movement, we have to be Seventh-day Adventists. To be Seventh-day Adventists, we have to be Millerites. To be Millerites, we need to be Protestants. To be Protestants, we need to be Christians. To be Christians, we need to believe in the prophecies of the Old Testament. It all goes back to the beginning.
And that's 5 steps.
Okay. Yeah, so the rubbish that came in, he's clear that this is the various and numerous errors. That's the way that he depicts it. But I would say if the dirt and the shavings and the false coins and the false jewels are right, he says the spurious jewels and counterfeit coins were scattered among the genuine. He says this is the strange children. But I would still say that it's more likely that it's false doctrines, and the dirt and the shavings are just things that are false doctrines. Those are man's traditions. Those would probably be all of the progressive Adventism.
I find it interesting because in putting this together from what had been ignored on the Ellen White website, the 7th footnote was the first one that they did not provide a good reference on. So when you're placing it and you're putting it in its proper place, you come down where Miller has written, I now saw that among the genuine jewels and coin, they had scattered an innumerable quantity of spurious jewels and counterfeit coin. I was highly incensed at their base conduct and ingratitude. Now, the situation here, how can a teaching, no matter how false, be seen as having ingratitude? So this gives another point back to your original premise that this was people. I'm not saying it sets aside this as being false doctrine. I'm just saying it supports the other premise.
Yeah. Well, I think both have to be true.
Okay. Now, what he continued to say, or what White continued to say in his footnote, the spurious jewels and the counterfeit coin that were scattered among the genuine clearly represent false converts or strange children. And here he gives the representation from Hosea 5:7. And he's making the application that they were false converts since the door was shut in 1844. Now, do I understand it correctly that this was the 3rd shut door?
Well, there's a shut door in Noah's day. There is a shut door. There's lots
in the Millerite time frame.
In the Millerite time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, you have October 22nd. You have April 19th.
Don't you also have a shut door of type in 1798?
Well, I don't really see it. I mean, sort of, but not.
That's what I'm saying, of type.
Yeah, because it typifies the shut doors later on, because that's in a sense a closed door for the papacy.
Okay, now does that not also typify a shut door for the priests, one for the Levites, and then one that shuts in the Nethinim and shuts out the world at the end?
Well, see, when you look at 1798, that parallels 1989.
Okay.
So there is a shut door in a sense for the Adventist church there. because they reject prophecy. So the time of the end comes. It comes because in any history, because there is it's closing for someone, right? For Babylon, it's the fall of Babylon. It's the capture of the Pope, fall of spiritual Babylon. I mean, you have all these different shut doors that begin a reform line. So, but that's not part of the other group, right? So you can't mix the groups together. They're different shut doors. There's a message, and then there's a shut door for the group that receives that message or rejects it. And then there's a second message. There's a shut door for the group that receives or rejects that message. And then there's the third message, and there's a shut door for that third message. But that third message began October 22nd, 1844. And the shut door is going to be the close of probation for the world. So if you're looking on the big line, it depends which line you're on. I'm just saying you can't mix the lines together, the different shut doors. You get what I'm saying? So you can't, I wouldn't quite do it the way that you're doing it to get the three, but there are three. But there's three because there's three messages. Each message has a shut door.
Okay.
So we have to be clear which line we're looking at. In our history, of FFA, you have a door beginning to shut really with 2014. You have people leaving the movement. They're closing their probation. When they leave the movement, they're rejecting light. But we have some waymarks that are marked as well. So we mark October 22nd, 2014 as one of them. We also mark November 9th, 2019. But, we can even look at December 6th. If we wanted to, but we have to be clear what group we're talking about and how we're looking at that shut door. And are those, just because they're different dates, doesn't mean they're not part of a door that shut on a different date, because all that I see with December 6th is it's really the same group of people as November 9th. It just takes them time to make their decision because they're really part of the Omega. They sympathize with the Omega in spirit, not in content. That is, they would differ philosophically on liberalism or conservatism, but they're really the same.
All right.
And that doesn't mean that that's ended with December 6th for this movement, which is the thing we have to be careful about, because we could be caught up in that same spirit. Now, so dealing with the different, we're going to have to finish this tomorrow. We're not going to get very far today. Now he's going to talk about these different errors. These errors are so industriously propagated and urged upon the waiting flock at the time that Brother Miller had the dream. The true jewels were excluded from sight. Now, I would say that this much more refers to the teachings and the understanding, though he's applying it to the little flock, right? At that time, there was not an Advent paper in the land that had advocated the cause of present truth. The Day Dawn was the last to defend the true position of the little flock, but that died a number of months before the Lord gave Brother Miller his dream. And in its last dying struggle, pointed the weary sighing saints to 1877. So the Day Dawn was predicting the coming of Christ in 1877. Then 30 years in the future, as the time of their final deliverance. Alas, alas, no wonder Brother Miller, in his dream, sat down and wept over this sad state of things. The casket represented the Advent truth that Brother Miller published to the world, as is marked out by the parable of the 10 virgins. Matthew 25, 1-11. First, the time, 1843. A second, the tarrying time. Third, the midnight cry. at the 7th month, 1844, and the 4th, the shut door. So what is James White saying here about these? The first, the time, the second, the tearing time, the third, the midnight cry at the 7th month, and then the shut door in 1844. What's his reference to the first, second, third, and fourth?
He's
From-
going back to the three angels of Revelation 14 and the other angel.
Well, he's going back to Matthew 25, verse 1 to 11.
Yeah, but okay, here we're jumping into the 9th footnote.
Yeah,
So the issue I think that we're going to need to investigate and really address in a little bit better detail is going to be the 8th footnote, and then go into the 9th, because I think that the foundation of what we're going to see out of that 8th footnote is going to make very clear what White was saying and what you're asking about right now.
okay. Well, what I think he's talking about the first is they took their lamps with oil in their vessels, and some had no oil with them, right? And the wise took oil with their vessels with their lamps. And then they're good. So that's the first. Let's see, because what does he say? He says the first is, let's go back here. The first time, 1843, the second's the tearing time, the third, the midnight cry, and the 7th month movement, the 4th, the shut door. So he's taking those 4 events from this parable of the 10 virgins. So the first is they come, that's the going forth of the virgins. The second one is the tearing time, the bridegroom tarried. The third one is the midnight cry. There was a cry made at midnight. And then the 4th is going to be in verse 10, and while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. So he's taking those 4 events and marking them in Millerite history in parallel with the parable of the 10 virgins. But yeah, your point is taken. We're going to have to go back and look at this in more detail. Anybody have thoughts on this before we close with prayer? Because you want to look at point number 8, which
We've gone through the first 7 now. Now we go through point number 8, which begins, the dirt and the shavings, sand and all manner of rubbish. So it goes above this 1, 2, 3, 4 that
Yeah.
you're scrolling through right now.
Okay. Okay, so you're saying we have to look at that in more detail. Well, this would sort of be early writings, page 74.
Could start there, sure.
Okay. Okay. Any final thoughts?
I've already given you mine.
Okay. Anyone else? I mean, the one thing I can see is that being led to study this was extremely important. Now, I wanted to move ahead quicker than this, but I guess I can't. So, but tomorrow we will finish this off, this footnotes for Miller's Dream. And then we're going to be able to start on looking at the statements after 9/11 and try to piece together how they came to understand what they did about 9/11. So the one that I'm gonna send it to you, even though we didn't get a chance to look at it, is this August 2003 newsletter, Future News, and in this one, they're going to address 9/11 in a study, which is really quite interesting. And he starts it out with some stuff basically dealing with work that they were doing, missionary work. So he's just going to start doing that, and then he's going to start answering some questions. But the reason why I thought this was interesting is that he talks about this school in Malaysia that was dedicated on March 27th, 1999. So it's kind of interesting. And in some ways, this school that's happening, I mean, eventually Jeff ends up with a school as well. And there's the dates here are then connected with our line. So in a sense, these events here that he's talking about are prefiguring our history. So anyway, that's what we're going to look at tomorrow. Probably we might get there, but maybe the day after. Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, thank you again for guiding our study. Help us to dig deep into these things and to understand this history so that we can understand our own time. I pray for the various individuals who are studying for truth to understand it, for those that participate in these meetings, for those that watch them later on YouTube, and for those that read the various papers. We just ask, Lord, that your angels can watch over them, that your Holy Spirit can speak to them, and that you can continue to lead this work all over the world, apart from the things that we are even doing, that you are leading individuals. And we just pray for your power to be manifested upon this earth in this dark time of human history. And we pray and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.